Hello and welcome to this week's Funeral Facts with Deacon Marc. We've been going through a journey where we started talking about why do we have funerals and the four basic reasons why we have funerals: of worshiping God, thanking God for His love and mercy, for asking God's graces to fill that void that we have with faith, and then finally to pray for that person who passed away. And then we talked about the fact that there are three stages or stations to the rite of Christian funerals, and we talked about the Vigil. We talked about the funeral liturgy, which is the funeral mass, the source and summit of our faith. And then today we're talking about that final stage, the committal. The committal is a very powerful time. It's that time where we are saying goodbye to the loved one for that final time and turning that loved one over to God in their final resting place. In most cases, the committal is held right where that person is going to be laid to rest. And so there are times when it can't be. You have pouring down rain, you have snow, hail, whatever it may be. Sometimes the presider or the family will say, let's hold it inside the building, and then we'll move to that place of final rest and place the person in the ground or in that vault or niche or whatever it may be. But for the most part, the committal is held right at graveside or right at that point of the person being placed in the niche where they'll have that final resting place. There are two forms of a committal. There's the rite of committal, and then there's also the rite of committal with commendation. So if the person didn't have a funeral liturgy, didn't have a commendation at the funeral liturgy, that can be done at the committal time as well. But for the most part, most people have that liturgy, and we're doing the rite of committal, and so we'll talk about that today. The committal has a couple different pieces to it. There's the introductory rite, where we talk and welcome people to the rite, and we really talk about the fact that we're here for two reasons. One, again, to pray for that person who passed away, and secondly, to pray for ourselves and ask God to fill us at this time of trouble, at this time where many of us are feeling a lot of pain. We'll then have a very brief scripture verse just to ground ourselves back into scripture. And a scripture verse will be read, and then there'll be a prayer over that place of final commitment. And oftentimes that location will be sprinkled with holy water and blessed at that point in time if it is not already blessed. After we have the prayer of that place of final rest, that is where traditionally the person is laid to rest. So if the person is a traditional burial, that casket will be lowered into their place. Or if they're being placed in a niche, the person will be placed in the niche and the door will be placed over in front of it. That can also be done at the end of the rite for pastoral reasons, if it's believed it's best to do so at that time. But in a lot of ways it makes sense to do it here, because then after that final committal of that person into the ground or into their place of rest, then there is the Lord's Prayer, there's a final prayer for the individual, and then there is the blessing of those that are there. And so it kind of does bring closure to the whole rite by having that committal take place, committal of the body take place right there in the middle. And so you have some opening prayers, the committal of the body, and then some closing prayers and the blessing at the end. People always ask, should we stay for that committal of the body into the final resting place? And I always highly encourage it. The reason being is we are physical, psychological beings, and we're spiritual beings as well. And that seeing that person laid into the ground or put into the niche has a very powerful impact in helping us in those four components that we've talked about regularly about why do we have funerals. And so being present there for that is highly recommended and highly impactful in most cases as well. But it's also understandable as to why people wouldn't be there for that. And so it all does come down to, why do we have the rite of Christian funerals? Why do we have a committal? We have a committal because we're going to thank God for His love. We're going to worship Him. We're going to ask God to fill us with His graces through this rite. And then finally, we're praying for that person on their journey. And so that is our funeral facts for this week with Deacon Marc. Make it a great week, and may God bless you.